Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about Russia and particularly Putin and the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and examine why Putin seems to drive the globalists apoplectic with rage. With Viktor Orban and the president of Hungary or Prime Minister of Hungary, and to some extent the Polish government. These people seem to drive the globalists out of their mind. Now, simple reason is they make stuff up, like Orban's a fascist and a Nazi and Hitler. And, that's all. It's the usual stuff they come out with. As soon as you hear those lines and those put downs and ad hominems, it's nonsense. But Viktor Orban believes that he represents the Hungarian people who elected him. And that's hardly a revolutionary position to take. But it is today, because the globalists say, no, you don't represent the politicians all across the Western world. You don't represent the people who vote for you anymore. You represent us, the globalists. We decide what happens, and you will do what we say. The government of the United States, Canada, Australia, Britain, Germany, France, and so on, they all fall in the line, and they all dutifully do what the globalists tell them to do. And you can see it's suddenly the entire Western world erupts with white supremacy and Hitler and Nazis, fascists, all at the same time. The globalists, give them their talking points and tell them what to say, tell them what to do, and that's just how it is all across the Western world. Now, they'd like to make a clean sweep of the whole shebang, and that includes Russia with 100 million population, 90 to 100 million population, and Poland. Hungary's only a small population of 10 million, but they're in the European Union, and the European Union uses the most horrible high-handed tactics to intimidate and harass the government of Hungary to have more lesbian studies classes at university and things like that. And the globalists really just want complete control. For example, if Orban's government says, look, you can study black lesbian studies if you can go and do black lesbian studies at university if you want to, but you have to pay for it. It comes out of your pocket. It won't be something that the government subsidizes. For example, something that the government subsidizes. And that's it. The globalist sort of propaganda machine goes ballistic. He's a Nazi. He's a fascist. Look what he's doing. And no equality. Where's the equity? And really, Orban won't allow, and rightly so in my view, won't allow the divisiveness of race and gender and sexuality. He won't allow those things to be let loose in the Hungarian community, and all power to him for doing that. The Poles similarly are much more reluctant than Western Europe to do these things that would destroy their own country and bring in lots of peasant migrants from the third world and so on. Orban saying, well, no, if they want to fully assimilate and become Hungarian citizens in every way, then okay, we're happy to look at it. But if you just want to come in and freeload off and that's what the European Union wants. No, you have to take illiterate brown and black peasants. You have to, because we say so, and the globalists tell us what to do, and so we're telling you what to do, motherfucker. And this seems to be the globalist attitude. You do what we say, and Putin doesn't do that. And Putin, or whether he represents the Russian peasants or not, it's another matter. But he certainly doesn't represent the globalists, and that drives them crazy. And he clamps down on things like gay lesbian activism. He won't have any of this transgender nonsense. Now, these are devices that the globalists want to use to divide and debilitate and crush Western society. They don't give a fuck about transgenders or lesbians or black lesbians. They don't give a crap about them. But they're useful devices to crush and demoralize Western society. And that's why they use it, and that's why they push it. And they want to use those same tools in every society, be it Hungary or be it Russia. Now, Putin won't have any of that, and his view, quite rightly, by the way, is I'm the president here. I decide that shit, not you, the globalists. So you can get lost. Now, that's why the globalists are, and I think they're desperately baiting him. And let's talk a bit about Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's not a sort of a heavily populated country, and adjoining it to the north is Belarus, and both Belarus and Ukraine would be amongst, I don't know, the top 10 most corrupt places in the world. They're absolutely racked with corruption, and they will never be wealthy societies while they're that corrupt, and they just can't seem to clean themselves up at all. And instead of stamping out corruption in there, or instead of the West and the globalists helping them stamp out corruption, they want more of it, because that's a way you can debilitate a society as well. Corruption. And they've hit the Ukraine with a whole lot, gay, lesbian, this, and transgender that, and a natural predisposition to outrageous corruption, whether it be in the voting booths or in business or allocation of contracts. And I mean, if you look at how corrupt it was, I mean, Joe Biden's son was given a very handsome gig, very well paid gig, just a gift for, and so Biden and his cronies and stooges, they're up to their neck in that sort of corruption, as other Western goons and so on are. They want that corrupt place to exist, because that means they can line their pockets as well without having to suffer the opprobrium, say, of trying to do that same thing in the United States or in the West. So, but we're getting there. I mean, look at the corruption around the supply of COVID masks and various materials. I mean, for goodness sakes, the amount of government ministers and their friends, relatives and mistresses who got these supply contracts that weren't even put out to competitive public tender. I mean, that we're chasing Ukraine hard here in the West to try and match its corruption. So now, Ukraine and Belarus have always really been satellites of other countries, whether it's the Polish-Lithuanian kingdom, whether it's the greater Sweden. This is over time, over hundreds and hundreds of years. The greater Swedish Empire and so on, and it's gone back and forth, and they've very rarely actually been what you would call independent nations. They became virtual provinces of the greater Mongol Empire, really, at one stage. But then when sort of the Mongol hordes receded, the Russians began to assert themselves, and Ukraine, given that it has a large wheat belt, which is important to the area, and really given Russia was the most populous of the countries, they in that region, they really wanted to control, or have some control over the supply of wheat, and so the idea of invading the Ukraine was always on. Now, so Ukraine and Belarus have very rarely been independent countries. They've got no tradition of independence or of governance or of anything like that at all, and it shows, given how fucking corrupt they are. But when the Russians began to sort of assert themselves after the Mongol hordes receded, they invaded and took over Ukraine and Belarus and various other places, going from the east of the Urals right across to the Pacific Ocean near Japan and Vladivostok and the Kamchatka Peninsula, and going all that way. I think there's 11 or 12 time zones in the whole Russian continent. So and the way the Russians called this is in the days of the Tsars. The Tsar or Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, was Empress of what they called all the Russias. So all these satellite countries they invaded were referred to as little Russias, and at that stage, the Russians were pushing the Turks, the Ottoman Empire as it was then, pushing the Turks out of the Crimea and the around Baku and that isthmus in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. They were pushing the Turks out of there, and they were having a lot of wars, constantly war, really. And as the Turkish Empire was declining, the Turks really, or the Ottomans, were really unable to hold back the Russians, and also the unrest in Europe. Hungary, in fact, was part of the Ottoman Empire at one stage. And these, the Hungarians, the Austrians, and the Serbs, and all that area around the Balkans, Greece, and so on, they were all clamouring for independence from the Ottomans. At one stage, a British traveller went to the Parthenon in Athens, one of the great buildings of, all time, and certainly European heritage, and found that it had been turned into a bazaar for Turkish carpet sellers selling carpets, and it wasn't even a tourist attraction. That the Turks treated it with or the Ottomans rather treated it with contempt and disregard. Something that I think will happen to the West if the globalists continue to have their way. But anyway, that was the back. So when the First World War ended, the Ukraine nominally had its independence, but as soon as Poland got declared a nation again, because it had been divided between Russia and Germany in the 1870s, as soon as it divided, as soon as Poland got its independence again following World War One, almost the first thing they did was go to war against Russia, that was also having a civil war at the time, and they took a slice of territory from, part of it from Ukraine and part of it from Belarus. And there's a lot of Poles and people sort of interchanging across that entire border area around there. So anyway, the Belarus and Ukraine had a brief sort of independence. Then when the Soviet Union got their shit together and started to reassert themselves, then Ukraine and Belarus became Soviet provinces again, as they had been in the time of Tsarist Russia. Now, when the Germans invaded, or the Wehrmacht invaded in 1941, they technically at least gave Ukraine and Belarus their independence again, but that was lost when the Red Army was advancing, through into Europe, and so they became Soviet satellites again after really what was a brief war with the Red Army. So, or brief war of independence in the case of Ukraine with the Red Army. So that the Ukrainians always wanted the Russians out, really. Now, when the Soviet Union fell apart, then this Commonwealth of Independent States came up in 1989, and Ukraine and Belarus became independent again, or somewhat independent, although they still relied, quite heavily in a lot of ways on the Russians. Now, the Russians had sort of stationed a lot of nuclear weapons there. They, for just administrative reasons, they turned the Crimea, which is the Black Sea naval port and very important port for Russian, Russian defence and power projection and so on. They made the Crimea sort of part of the Ukraine, and then the Russians decided, well, gee, that's not going to really work now. We've got this Commonwealth of Independent States, and Ukrainians are being difficult and how corrupt they are and that sort of thing. So we better take that over again. There's a lot of Russians living there, and they did that, and that was kind of a bit of a problem that everyone got jumped up and down about. But since the globalists have really been pushing the globalist agenda, certainly very hard since the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, the globalists have really been pushing the globalist agenda. Then they bumped up against Putin and Russia. And Putin really doesn't want anything to do with this globalist stuff. He doesn't want gay, lesbian activists running around, and he doesn't want to have to take in black and brown peasants to come and take over Moscow, and he's not interested in that. He, as far as it goes, he represents the Russian people, maybe the better off ones, but at least he represents the Russian people, or at the very least, he doesn't represent the globalists, which is probably more the material point, and that's what drives them insane. It drives them crazy. And this idea of the Ukraine, America's going to go to war over the Ukraine, that's bullshit. The Ukraine means nothing other than the corrupt value of Biden sticking his relatives in there to get paid huge money for doing nothing. But beyond that, the Ukraine's got no strategic value to the US or not. And if if the Russians take the eastern part of Ukraine, including, say, the Donbass basin, which is like an industrial area, then that's not the end of the world. And given Ukraine is a corrupt basket case, given that, then why would anyone want to go to war over that? If they get their shit together and become a well-administered, well-organised, clean and non-corrupt state, contributing to the stability of the region, then that's a good thing, and they should get help doing that. But instead, they're being encouraged, in fact, aided and abetted, to continue being a corrupt basket case, which is really sad. Very much the globalist playbook. So, will America go to war over Ukraine? And that's, I don't think so. I can't see that happening. Would it really matter in the overall scheme of things, as in the greater, wider scheme of things, if the Russians took over eastern Ukraine, including parts of the Donbass basin? I don't think so. Would it really change anything? No. And if Ukraine was a really well-administered state and no being invaded, that would be a little bit of a different thing. But they're not. Far from it. Again, Belarus and Minsk is the capital of Belarus, and Kiev of Ukraine. It's a corrupt basket case, which is sad because there's a lot of bright people. I've met quite a few Russians or Ukrainians that have come from there. Some of them are very bright, hardworking people. So it's not like they don't have the raw material to do something worthwhile if they wanted to, but they're choosing not to. They're choosing to stay with corruption and influence peddling and all that sort of stuff. So maybe all the people around the area deserve each other. Do I think NATO will go to war over it? I mean, part of the thing is NATO wants to bring Ukraine into NATO, and the Russians say, well, why? Why do you need to do that? What's the purpose of it? And I think it's just a tool or a cat's paw to try and irritate and annoy and threaten Putin into being a good little globalist flunky. And he doesn't want to be, and he doesn't have to be, and nor should he be. That's my view. You've been a Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.